At lunch, my daughter sat alone. Not because she's shy, but because she chose to. She told me that if everyone's too afraid to sit next to the kid being picked on, then someone has to stop being afraid first. And she decided it might as well be her. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just about kindness anymore. It had turned into something else. Something firmer, sharper, heavier. The kind of decision a child makes when they've been watching carefully for far too long and no one else in the room is willing to name what's happening. That morning started like any other. I was rushing to get breakfast on the table while also packing lunches, searching for her missing sock under the couch, and trying not to burn the toast for the third day in a row. She came into the kitchen fully dressed, which was unusual for a Monday, and calmly added a second yogurt to her lunchbox. No explanation, just a quick glance in my direction and a soft, "Just in case." I didn't ask who the second yogurt was for. I didn't need to. It was gray outside, typical for Bellingham this time of year. Not raining exactly, but everything was wet. The air smelled like bark and cold pavement. Parents shuffled kids out of minivans while balancing coffee cups and umbrellas that were always either too broken or too small. My daughter adjusted her hood and waved to a girl she used to sit with during art club, but the wave wasn't returned. She didn't flinch. Later that morning, the school sent out a parent newsletter. These always arrived around 10:30 a.m., usually filled with calendar updates and cheerful anecdotes from the classroom. But this time there was a paragraph from Ms. Ryan, the homeroom teacher, and it caught my eye. She had written, "We are proud to highlight Trevor this month for his exceptional social skills and kindness. He is a true helper and brings others together." I reread that line twice, and then again, slower. Trevor. Social skills. Kindness. Trevor. The same boy who, just last week, made a joke loud enough for everyone to hear about how Luca, a boy in their class with sensory processing issues, still runs on Windows XP while the rest of us are iOS. He said it with a big grin. He always smiles. I don't know how that smile works on adults, but it works. Teachers laugh along. Other parents call him charming. The kids, most of them, follow his lead. Not because they're cruel, but because it's easier to laugh with someone who never gets in trouble than it is to speak up when that someone makes another child flinch. When I asked my daughter how school was that day, she didn't mention the email. She said Luca had lunch alone again. She said no one asked him to sit with them. Not because they didn't like him, but because, in her words, they forget he's there until he does something weird. I asked what weird meant. She looked at her plate and said, "He talks to his food sometimes." She'd started sitting with him every other day. Just casually, she said. So he's not bored. No one asked her to. No one told her to stop either. But the looks started coming. Kids glancing over. Whispers just loud enough to be felt but not heard. And then one day after recess, someone, we don't know who, stuck a folded paper on her backpack. Inside, one word, Savior. She didn't cry. She didn't tell the teacher. That night, she asked if she could start bringing her lunch out to the benches by the far end of the playground. When I asked why, she said, "It's quieter there." She watches videos now, not cartoons, not silly edits, educational ones. Last week I walked by her room and saw her watching a clip about autism in children. She sat with her knees pulled up, face close to the screen, listening carefully as a woman explained that some kids need fewer words and more space. She didn't take notes, but she didn't look away once. When it ended, she set the phone down and said, to no one in particular, "He's not weird. He's just not yours." I don't think she meant to say it aloud. I think it was something that had been sitting inside her, waiting for the right shape to come out. That night I found her folding napkins. White ones. From a pack I bought months ago and forgot about. She made perfect triangles and lined them up like little flags, neat and careful, one by one. I asked what they were for. She shrugged. Just in case we ever have a party, she said. She didn't mention that the class was already planning one, a big end-of-year picnic, with teams and games and a sign-up sheet in the hallway. Trevor was organizing it. Of course he was. The sheet had everyone's name on it. Everyone except Luca. The thing is, no one said he couldn't come, but no one wrote him down either. That's how these things work. And she noticed. She notices everything. They added his photo to the wall just last week, maybe Monday or Tuesday. I can't remember now. But I do remember walking into the school for a quick drop-off and seeing it right there on the Star Students board, printed in full color, laminated, and surrounded by gold foil stars that someone must have carefully glued into place, like this was an award that meant something lasting. Under the photo was a caption in a cheerful font that read, "Student of the Month, Trevor, for leadership and teamwork." There was nothing else, just that. I stood there longer than I meant to, still holding the box of markers I was supposed to deliver to the art room, just staring at the words and wondering, honestly, what definition of teamwork we were all working with now. Because if saying clever, cutting things about the quietest kid in the room and then calling it a joke was what passed for social excellence, then I must have missed a memo somewhere. Later that afternoon, the parent newsletter came through, as it always does on Tuesdays. Bright colors, emojis, casual tone. The principal wrote the opening paragraph about celebrating inclusion and connection. And a little further down, Ms. Ryan had included her own note, which said, "We are so proud of Trevor's empathy and natural leadership. He's been a wonderful example to his peers in how to include others and show kindness." I read that sentence 3 times, not because I couldn't believe it, but because I could, and that was somehow worse. Trevor, whose version of kindness included making sure his jokes were just quiet enough not to get flagged, but just loud enough to make Luca pause mid-sentence and look at his hands instead of finishing a thought. Trevor, who could high-five a teacher right after suggesting, loudly, that Luca's brain was running Windows 98 while the rest of us are on 5G, and get praised for his wit. That same day, my daughter came home with a slightly crumpled flyer from her backpack, printed on colored paper with doodles in the margins and smiley faces by every name. It was the student council election form. Trevor was running, obviously. His campaign slogan, written in thick red marker, said, "We're all in this together." She handed me the paper without comment and went to change out of her shoes. I asked her later if Luca was going to run too. She didn't look up from the sink. "No one asked him," she said. And after a pause, "He wouldn't win anyway." She didn't say it cruelly. She said it like a person who had already watched enough to know how these things go, like someone who had accepted, way too early, that the world does not hand out fairness in equal portions. That week, I was early to pickup and passed by the playground. A small group of kids were laughing. Luca was trying to tell a story, something about his pet turtle, and kept mixing up his words. Trevor repeated the story with exaggerated pauses and funny voices, and the kids cracked up. Then he said, "It's just a joke," and that was that. I'm not sure if Luca smiled or not. I don't think anyone checked. During a scheduled check-in with the school counselor later that week, I sat in a small office with laminated posters on the wall and listened as she described the classroom climate as warm, supportive, and peer-led. She used the phrase community-minded and said she was so impressed by how the students were helping each other this month. She mentioned Trevor by name. Again. I nodded and smiled and kept my hands folded in my lap. I didn't say anything, not because I agreed, but because I wasn't ready to be the one who ruined the party. That evening, my daughter was at the table with scissors and markers, working on a poster. At the top, she had written, "Vote for nobody. No sparkles. No balloons. Just block letters and a border made of little black X's. I asked if she was going to hang it. She shook her head. "They'll take it down," she said, then folded it and slid it into her drawer. "It's just for me to remember." Later that night, over leftovers, I finally asked her if she thought what was happening to Luca counted as bullying. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "They're not mean. They just act like he's not there. That's worse." And I realized she wasn't asking for help. She was just checking if I saw it too. I offered, gently, to talk to her teacher. She said no. "Not yet. I just need to know if I'm feeling it right." After she went to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and typed into the search bar. Subtle exclusion in elementary school. What I found wasn't surprising, but it was endless. Stories from parents, studies from educators, posts from kids who are now adults trying to name what happened to them when no one else did. I read until my eyes blurred, and the thing that stayed with me, louder than anything, was this. Sometimes the cruelest thing is not what people say, it's what they pretend not to notice. The email arrived midweek, cheerful as always, with bright clip art borders and a bold headline that read, "Parent-Teacher Gathering. Join us in celebrating positive peer culture." And the body of the message was full of smiling emojis, bullet points about snacks and class art projects, and one line near the end that said the children would be highlighting ways they support one another through kindness, compassion, and connection. A sentence that, on any other day, I might have skimmed and forgotten, but this time I read twice. That evening, while brushing her teeth, my daughter asked, in a voice more certain than usual, whether I'd be going to the meeting, and when I said yes, she looked at me in the mirror and said, not unkindly but very clearly, "Just promise not to speak for me, and please don't take his side, not until you've listened." She didn't need to explain who he was, and I didn't ask, because by now there was only one person in her world who fit into that kind of sentence. Someone who smiled when others were watching, laughed when Luca tripped on his own words, and somehow still ended up with a gold star on every bulletin board. The cafeteria changed that week. Nothing official, just a small shift in the arrangement of tables and benches, meant to encourage open seating, but really just erasing the safe corners where kids like Luca used to sit with at least one side protected. And now, with the tables pushed together into longer lines, he was exposed in a way that felt quiet but unmistakable, sitting alone with his head down and his juice box unopened, like someone waiting for the bell, not the food. When my daughter entered the cafeteria that day, she walked directly toward him, not fast, not slow, just deliberate, and placed her tray beside his, sat down without asking, and unwrapped her sandwich with the kind of steady, practiced calm that tells you she's done this before. And when two boys at the next table muttered, "Miss Lifesaver strikes again," she didn't look up, didn't respond, just kept eating. That night, after dinner, she stayed at the table with a notebook open, pencil in hand, drawing slow, heavy lines under each sentence like she was measuring her words by weight. And when I passed by again a half hour later, she looked up and said, almost shyly, "You can read it. Just don't say anything until I'm in my room." I waited until the light clicked off under her door, then sat down and read the first line at the top of the page, which said, "If I could talk to grown-ups." What followed wasn't a speech and wasn't a diary entry. It was something in between, written with restraint and clarity, with none of the dramatic emotion adults often expect from children, and it described, in careful detail, how Trevor always seems to speak right after Luca says something, how his jokes are just loud enough to get the group laughing but quiet enough to avoid adult notice, how his helpfulness only shows up when people are watching, and how kids like Luca end up invisible not by accident but by design. She ended it with a line that I still haven't been able to stop thinking about. If you're the grown-ups, that means you're supposed to be smarter than us. I folded the paper and slipped it into my coat pocket before washing the dishes, thinking not about what I would say at the meeting, but whether I would say anything at all, because sometimes the hardest part of being a parent isn't knowing what to fight. It's knowing when to let your child speak for herself. When the evening of the meeting arrived, I wore a jacket with deep pockets and made sure the letter was inside, unfolded and smooth, so I wouldn't have to fumble with it if the moment came, though I still wasn't sure if I'd be able to stand up and use it. And when I entered the library, where the meeting was already underway, the smell of coffee and bulletin board paper hit me immediately, and a group of smiling parents were standing near the windows admiring a student-made mural titled, "Friendship Grows Here." There were chairs in a semicircle, tables lined with cookies and fruit, and colorful drawings of students holding hands taped to the whiteboard behind Ms. Ryan, who was in the middle of thanking everyone for raising such thoughtful, socially engaged children. And before I could even sit down, I heard her say, "We're especially proud of Trevor, who continues to model empathy and lead with kindness in every interaction." I took a seat near the back, pulled my coat tighter, and kept the letter in my pocket, fingers curled around the edge of the paper while polite applause filled the room, and someone offered to take a picture for the school's Facebook page. Then a woman near the front, someone I didn't recognize, raised her hand and asked, almost casually, "Hey, I didn't see Luca in the class photo display. Where is he?" Ms. Ryan smiled the kind of smile that's been practiced for years and said warmly, "Oh, Luca thrives best in smaller settings, so we make sure he has a comfortable space during group events. It's all about supporting what works for each student." There were nods, of course, supportive ones, affirming ones, the kind of nods that let everyone off the hook. A few minutes later, while parents were still discussing how sweet the mural was, a woman sitting beside me leaned over and whispered, "Your daughter. She's the one who always sits with him, right? That's such a beautiful thing. Really rare these days." I turned slightly, offered a polite smile, unsure what to say, and then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Though honestly, it can make it a bit hard for the other kids to connect with her. You know how group dynamics are." I didn't answer. I just turned back to the front, where Ms. Ryan had moved on to announcements about field day sign-ups, and for the first time, I saw everything. Not as a parent defending her daughter or a woman trying to make space for another kid's voice, but as someone who had just been quietly told that her child was a little too much, a little too visible, a little too unwilling to play along. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't a celebration. It was a script, and we weren't written in. I didn't expect the meeting to shake anything loose. I went with her words in my pocket and no real plan, just the quiet hope that maybe someone in the room would say the thing out loud that we've both been thinking for weeks. But instead, there were handouts printed on pastel paper, banners strung across the whiteboard that read, "One team, one heart," and Ms. Ryan smiling near a tray of cupcakes as if nothing could possibly be wrong in a room with that much frosting. I kept my coat on even after I sat down. I don't know why. Maybe it was the chill from the window. Maybe I wanted the paper inside to stay close, like armor. She was already speaking when I arrived, walking the group through the month's focus on kindness and student leadership, describing how their classroom lives its values, and how proud she is of how the children hold each other accountable with empathy. Her voice was steady, warm, familiar. When she brought up Trevor again, for the third time that month by my count, she said he was a natural model of inclusion and praised the way he welcomes others into group work, how he always helps redirect kids when social energy gets too high. A few parents clapped before she even finished the sentence. I felt my fingers tighten around the folded paper in my pocket. Then someone, a man near the front, maybe one of the dads I've passed in the pickup line, raised his hand and asked casually why Luca hadn't been included in the class slideshow. His tone was neutral, but my stomach dropped anyway. Ms. Ryan didn't hesitate. She smiled, soft and practiced, and said, "Luca does best in smaller groups. We give him options, and sometimes big gatherings just aren't where he thrives." It wasn't what she said that got me. It was how smoothly she said it. The room nodded along, accepting her answer like gospel. No one asked another question. The conversation moved on. That's when the woman next to me leaned over and whispered, "Is your daughter the one who sits with him?" Her voice was kind, maybe even admiring. "It's really beautiful. She's clearly so empathetic." I nodded, unsure whether to feel proud or exposed. Then she smiled again, this time a little tighter, and said, "Though I guess it can be hard for the other kids to connect with her because of it." Like it was a side effect, not a consequence. Like this was just how things work when your child chooses the wrong seat too often. It hit me sideways. I didn't see it coming. Until that moment, I'd been carrying my daughter's letter like a statement of truth. But now I saw how others were already framing it, not as a sign of her strength, but as proof of her social misalignment. The kind of kid who meant well but got in the way, a disruption in the balance. I saw it in how the woman returned to her notes like nothing important had been said. I didn't pull out the letter. I didn't speak. That night, my daughter didn't ask how the meeting went. She was focused on cutting out construction paper leaves for a poster project, and kept humming some tune I didn't recognize. On one of the leaves, she wrote, "Luca gave me a dandelion once, and said it matched my hair." No one told her to include that memory. It wasn't on the rubric, but she wrote it anyway. After she went to bed, I got a phone call from a woman who works with the school's leadership program, the one that coordinates peer mentorships and buddy initiatives. She thanked me first, said she wanted me to know how much they value my daughter's presence in the classroom. "She's emotionally intelligent in ways most kids her age aren't," she said. "It's really impressive." Then came the shift. "We've noticed she tends to focus a lot of her energy on one student in particular. And while we absolutely encourage kindness, we also want to help her broaden her connections." Her tone was gentle, but I could hear the script behind it. I asked what that meant, and she replied, "We're thinking she might benefit from a class with more evenly distributed peer dynamics. A reset, if you will." She didn't say the name Luca, but she didn't have to. She was telling me, very politely, that my daughter was standing too close to the wrong kid, and that, over time, this could become a problem not for him, but for her. Then she added, "Of course, it's your choice. Nothing's being forced. We just want to support her social development." I thanked her and hung up before my voice could betray anything. Then I sat in the kitchen, lights off, hands flat on the counter. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just reached into my coat pocket and took out the letter I hadn't read aloud. I smoothed its edges and opened my laptop. I printed 10 copies. Not because I knew what I was going to do with them, but because it suddenly felt necessary to put those words, my daughter's quiet, clear voice, into a form that couldn't be ignored. The letter ends like this: "If you're adults, then you should be better at knowing when something's wrong." I don't think she meant that as an accusation. I think she meant it as a reminder. The next morning, I left the house earlier than usual. The printer was still warm from the night before, and the 10 copies of my daughter's letter, the one she had written to no one in particular and everyone at once, were stacked neatly in a large envelope, which I placed in my bag without really thinking through what I would say if someone stopped me. I didn't plan a speech or write a message to go with them. I just decided that they had to land somewhere other than inside a pocket. The school was quiet when I arrived. A few early staff were carrying boxes of supplies across the lobby, and the front office smelled like coffee and laminated paper. I didn't make small talk or ask permission. I walked down the hallway and slid one copy of the letter into each of the labeled teacher mailboxes. Ms. Ryan, student support, guidance, admin, and the parent council folders. It took less than 3 minutes. I didn't linger. I left before the first bell rang. My daughter didn't know I had done it. That morning, she packed her own lunch and added an extra napkin, not because she thought it would be messy, but because Lucas sometimes forgot his. I watched her from the kitchen, trying not to make it a moment. She adjusted the straps of her backpack like it weighed more than it should have. It was still cold enough outside that kids wore layered jackets and left wet footprints through the hallways. But the rain had stopped, and the sun had returned in that unsure, half-hearted way it does in early spring. Just enough warmth to hold lunch outdoors. Just enough blue sky to pretend everything was fine. By midday, folding benches were dragged out onto the asphalt near the back lot, and a Bluetooth speaker on wheels played a mix of bubblegum pop and 2 loud school announcements. Trash bags were tied to the poles. Teachers walked through clusters of kids, handing out wipes and reminding them not to trade snacks. Everyone was shifting, clustering, glancing around for who they'd sit next to. Kids moved fast when it was time to belong. She didn't. She spotted Luca near the end of one bench, head down, picking at the edge of his juice box, and walked over without hesitation. She sat beside him, unwrapped her sandwich, and said something that made him look up. He nodded. Then he smiled. Not the big kind, not for show, just a quiet curve of his mouth. The kind of smile you make when you realize someone really means it. A few minutes later, one more kid joined them. A boy who didn't say much, just opened his bag of chips and sat like it was no big deal. They ate like that, the 3 of them, on a bench that used to belong to no one. I watched from the parking lot, my car window cracked just enough to hear the wind and the distant sound of music. I hadn't planned to stay, but I needed to see if what we did, what she did, would hold. That afternoon, a formal email arrived from the school. No real emotion, just a brief line. Thank you for your engagement. Your feedback has been noted and shared with the appropriate teams. That was it. Later that night, while setting the table, she told me Trevor had invited her to play with the group at recess. Offered a truce, she said. We can just be chill again, were his exact words. I waited, unsure where the sentence would land. Then she added, with a calm that felt older than it should have, I told him no. I don't forget like that. I looked at her, unsure whether to push, but something in her face told me she didn't need comfort. She needed to be believed. So I just nodded, and we ate dinner without circling the subject again. After she went to bed, I sat down and wrote a message in the class parent chat, the one that usually buzzed with carpool swaps and birthday RSVP links, and shared only a few lines. No names, no commentary, just 3 excerpts from the letter. Sometimes the quiet kids aren't quiet because they want to be. Kindness isn't about helping when someone's watching. You shouldn't get a trophy for not being cruel. For a long time there was silence. Then one reply. A mom I barely knew. She wrote, "Thank you for sending this. My son doesn't talk about school, but I think he's watching everything, just like your daughter. Only he's not brave enough yet to act." The next day at lunch, something shifted. 2 girls from another table brought their trays over and sat beside Luca. Then another kid, someone from the art group, I think, pulled up a chair nearby. There wasn't a big moment. No one clapped or took pictures. No teacher gave a speech about inclusion. They just sat. I stood near the car again, pretending to scroll through emails while watching from across the lot. Ms. Ryan was inside the building, near the library windows, looking out toward the lunch benches. She smiled when she saw them all sitting together. But it was the kind of smile that stayed on the mouth and didn't quite reach her eyes. Something had landed, but not where she wanted it. Spring in Bellingham doesn't work like a normal season. It's not that it warms gradually or arrives with some poetic consistency. Instead, it jerks between cold drizzle and strange heat, like the weather can't remember who it's supposed to be. And that week had already seen 2 near storms, 1 canceled field trip, and a surprise patch of sun so warm it felt like the sky had made a mistake. The school seized the chance and sent out an email at 10 a.m., letting everyone know lunch would be held outside to celebrate the beautiful weather, which made it sound like something had been earned. By the time I drove past the back lot near the gym, the asphalt had been transformed. Long folding benches were set up in wide rows beside the chain-link fence. Trash cans had been wheeled out and weighed down with rocks to keep the lids from flying. And somewhere off to the side, a Bluetooth speaker played a familiar beat that made the whole space feel like a scene from a school brochure. Kids laughing, staff walking in lines, everyone carrying the noise of what it means to be 10 and loud and searching for where to sit. She didn't hesitate that day. No pausing, no scanning the crowd for cues. She walked toward Luca the moment she spotted him near the edge of the far bench, where the sun hadn't quite reached, and sat down beside him like she'd done it 100 times. No drama, no permission asked, no performative nods. Just a girl, a tray, and a spot beside the only kid no one was circling around. Luca looked up, blinked once, then smiled with the kind of expression that isn't about happiness, but about being allowed to exist. She unwrapped her sandwich. He pulled out his juice box. They didn't say much, at least not that I could hear from the car, but they didn't need to. There's a quiet language between kids like them, and it works just fine without audience. A few minutes passed, then another boy, the one who sat with them last week, appeared, tray in hand, and dropped into the seat across from them with the same quiet nonchalance. It wasn't a statement. It wasn't an act of resistance. It was just lunch, and for once, that was enough. From the parking lot, I kept the car running, unsure why I still needed to be there, why I kept watching like it was a test I couldn't afford for her to fail. But watching her lean toward Luca, nod at something he said, then laugh without glancing around to check if anyone noticed, it reminded me that sometimes the most important moments don't need witness. They just need space. That night, when I was putting groceries away, and she was peeling a sticker off a banana, she asked if we had a picture frame. Not a fancy one, just an extra. I asked why, and she said she wanted to hang her letter. Not for the wall, she added. Just in my room, for me, and for anyone who sits there with me. We found one in a drawer, an old wooden frame with a chip in the corner. She brushed it off and slid the letter inside, smoothing the edges like she was handling something fragile but known. Then she taped it to the wall near the window, not high up where grown-ups hang things, but lower, right at eye level if you were sitting on the floor beside her bed. I didn't ask why she chose that spot. She didn't explain. Later, as I turned off the lights in her room, I saw the paper in the frame glowing slightly in the blue of her nightlight, and I realized the thing she had built, not just the act, but the ethic of it, wasn't for show. It was architecture, a thing to lean against, a marker that said, I was here, and I saw what others missed. I checked my phone before bed. No emails from school, no calls, no update on social dynamics. Just quiet. But it wasn't empty. It was breathing room. A day later, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. It read, I heard your daughter is the one who always sits with Luca. Thank you. We're going through the same thing, but my son doesn't speak up. I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. Entirely, painfully, and all the way down. I didn't reply. I just let the weight of it sit beside me on the couch. The following week, a girl from another class brought a folded piece of paper to lunch and handed it to Luca. He didn't open it right away. But when he did, I saw something shift in his face. My daughter glanced over, saw the note, and smiled. Not because it was proof that anything had changed, but because it meant someone else had started paying attention. That's what this is, I think. Not a victory, not a fix, just attention. There's no happy ending to write here. No photo of the bench taped to a trophy. No newsletter quote from the school praising her. No redemption arc for Trevor. There's just the three of them. One bench, a bag of grapes being passed from hand to hand, a plastic container that gets split in half without anyone offering commentary, and the sound of kids being loud around them, but not on them. It's enough. They don't sit there because they have to. They don't sit there to be seen. They sit because they can. Because someone made space. Because they decided that sitting beside someone counts. And this time, no one is trying to move them.